Since I started studying it in university, film noir has become one of my favorite genres in film. It's a very interesting kind of genre that took the stereotypical roles for men and women and turned them on their heads, where women could be up front and stare down weaker men. Nowadays it might seem a little old to think in that kind of sense, but film noir has retained its status as a classic genre, and even today ideas that are purely film noir are found in other movies, most notably movies by the Coen brothers. Ever remember No Country for Old Men or Fargo? But it was back in the 40s and 50s when film noir was at its peak. In a time of very strict censorship, film noir pushed the envelope as far as it could, presenting such normally untalked of themes such as adultery, murder, and whether the hero really is that much of a hero or not. When people think of noir, they usually think of John Huston, who provided us with The Maltese Falcon and Asphalt Jungle, and I've also mentioned Fritz Lang, who I consider to be the greatest film noir director who ever lived. But there's another very famous filmmaker who dabbled in film noir at an early age in his career, and that man is Stanley Kubrick, famous for such thoughtful and well-made films and the crazy production stories behind those films. It's kind of hard to talk about Stanley Kubrick's movie as underrated because most people have heaped praises upon his entire filmography. Nevertheless, I still say The Killing seems to be overlooked when compared to such other films that he's made. Yes, this was made at a very early point in his career, but I still think it's one of the best films he ever made. Here is how the movie basically begins. After getting out of prison, Johnny Clay decides to formulate a complex racetrack heist, and his scheme is aided and abetted by the criminals he assembles to help him out. A simple-minded person could probably come up with 4 words to summarize this movie, but they would miss out on all the artistry, the performances, the creativity of the storyline, and how enticing of a story it is. When a movie takes its time to create the characters and fully flesh them out, it makes the storyline all the more interesting because we really know these characters and we really care about them, and thus it makes the story all the more interesting. One thing Kubrick did really well was create scenarios that not only move the plot forward, but also show you what kind of characters these people are. Consider the main character Johnny Clay, played wonderfully by Sterling Hayden. In one of my own personal favorite moments in the film, he goes to recruit a man that will help create a diversion while he steals the money. It turns out that Maurice is a former wrestler, and Johnny offers him $2,500 to create a fight that will draw most of the security towards him, leaving the money unguarded. Maurice points out that Johnny could get any hoodlum off the street and do the same job for $100, to which Johnny replies that he wants someone he can trust. He wants someone who he knows will get the job done. This shows us a lot of insight into Johnny's character. We see that he's not willing to cut corners to get a job done. His dedication leans almost towards paranoia in his attempt to make sure everything is done properly, so that everyone benefits from this heist, and he can get away with it scot-free. Although he's committing various criminal acts, we can't help but admire Johnny Clay on a certain level. And it's that kind of idealism that film noir gorged upon. Another very film noir aspect of this film was the character of George and his wife Sherry. Unlike Johnny Clay, George is a very weak man. He allows his emotions to run wild, he's physically a weak man, and he's unable to react quickly in bad situations. His unprofessionalism also threatens the heist itself, like when he informs his wife about certain aspects of it. The wife, meanwhile, is having an affair, and she informs her lover about the money that George is about to earn due to the heist, and this leads to a plot trying to undermine the first plot. But all the while, the heist continues to be set up. Aside from Maurice and George, Johnny Clay also assembles the aid of a corrupt cop, a bartender, and another friend of his who is an expert marksman. He is sent out to shoot one of the horses on the racetrack, and this leads to another speed bump that affects the heist. This is one of those classic films that inspired such directors as Michael Mann and Quentin Tarantino. Aside from working as an excellent example of film noir, this movie also shows us just what a great crime thriller is composed of. This truly was a Kubrick film, with the wonderful cinematography, the standalone scenarios that added layers to the individual characters, the complex story that keeps us entranced, and the wonderful performances by Sterling Hayden, Elisha Cook Jr., and Timothy Carey, among others. Definitely a movie to enjoy on one of those days where you just want to see a classic film.